Hello, it's Alexa. You are listening or watching the Wishbeads podcast. And it gives me more pleasure than figuring out who I can bring onto the podcast to delight and inspire you. And when I met this individual, Sheila Darcey, she was leading a workshop and I was there, with Wishbeads, and I immediately was sucked in by her energy, by her talent, by her ability to guide us on a creative journey. And I want to talk about creativity here in the Wishbeads world, in the wishing world. I want to talk about play and learning how to prioritize this aspect of life that many times, because we are adulting, we shimmy off to the side. We think that's for somebody else, not me. I'm going to be serious. I'm going to work, get things done. But in the realm of wishing and personal development, play is an essential element. Creativity is something that is the gold of what's inside of us, as a tool to bring joy, connection, fun, community, all kinds of good things. And so in these next few weeks, I am going to be inviting more experiences for you to play, to create, to connect. We're going to do a 5-day creativity challenge over at Wishbeads during the month of July. So look for that. And for you, as you listen to Sheila's story, maybe reflect on the type of creativity that works for you, that gets you in a flow state, whether it's gardening or cooking or hula hooping or surfing the waves or scrapbooking, whatever that thing is for you, just reflect on it. And if there's something that is even an inkling of a desire or something you used to do when you were a child, see if you can just take the tiniest bit of action towards doing it in your own life. Signing up for a class, designating a Sunday afternoon, something. Take a trip to Michael's, the craft store, something that gets you in that playful, creative space. That's my invitation to you so that you can taste it and experience it for yourself. Sheila Darcey's work, it's exceptional. And I am so delighted that you get to know her and her work right now. Well, Sheila, I have to say, from the minute I heard you present yourself, I think it was more of an energy imprint. I was so excited to know you, to meet you, to learn from you, and here you are on the Wishbeads podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so grateful, and I reflect all that back to you. I felt the same. It's like girl crushing.
Indeed. Well, for those of you who are actually watching right now instead of just listening, Sheila, you have this unbelievable sketch behind you. And I think that what's so dynamic about the work that you do is that it's not just that you're taken in by your artistry. And I would imagine that most people are on Instagram and you can find Sheila at SketchPoetic, but learning about how sketching is your process itself was the other thing that just blew my mind. So let's dive in a little bit. I want to hear what sketching means to you. What is your relationship to sketching? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's not the traditional relationship most people have. When I was a child, I used to draw all the time. And I was a stereotypical child that drew to escape or just to imagine. And then at a period of time, I started to do it to disconnect because I was going through a lot of trauma as a child. But then around at the age of 15, I abandoned my art because I had the whole expectation about the starving artist, being in an art gallery. And I also had this tension with my culture of doing business and making a lot of money. And I ended up taking that path. And then fast forward to my early 40s, and I had debilitating anxiety. And I remember finally addressing that anxiety and that trauma. And I remember in that conversation with the therapist, she asked me if there was a healthy way that I would express my emotions, because she described anxiety as energy in your body you're not releasing, and that energy being caused by emotions you're not expressing. And I loved that definition. So she said, do you have a healthy way to express your emotions? And I remember thinking about when I was a child, I used to draw. And she said, have you ever thought about drawing to release your emotions? And that's kind of how it all started. But I call it sketching because in the art world, sketches are meant to be fast and loose. They're not meant to be seen. They lead to the masterpiece, but it's not about the audience. It's not about it being shown to the world. It's about the process of getting to the masterpiece. And I loved that metaphor. So that's why I call it sketching.
Well, there's so much actually that you just shared that I don't want to glance over it, because I think, let's go back to that decision. Well, one, identifying the thing that you love to do as a child.
Yeah.
I think that there is such an internal insight about that for each of us. The thing that comes so naturally. For me, a random thought that popped up this morning, very random, was when I was a kid, I wanted to be Dr. Dolittle. And I don't know if you know who Dr.
Oh, of
Dolittle is,
course.
but the
Speaking to the
idea that you could
animals.
have this magical ability to talk to animals.
Yes.
And I think there is something playful, and obviously that wasn't like a real job.
Well, with AI, it could be.
Well, yeah, exactly. Who knows? But for me, I feel like there is an insight, even if it's not just one thing, but that knowledge, self-knowledge, to go back in time, because I think many people right now are struggling with, let's say, a life transition or anxiety or wondering what's next for them. How can they reinvent their lives? So number one, really recognizing that there was something that you naturally love to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 15, there is something, I think also, and I have teenagers right now, so really right there, there is this moment where you can lean into that thing that is delightful, that spurs curiosity, maybe some confidence, or you can allow that narrative, whatever societal narrative, your parental narrative, whatever that may be, to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go do that safe thing over there.
Yes.
So is there more that you want to elaborate?
Yes, I would love to.
On sort of that moment of the decision to say, like, nope, I'm not going to be a starving artist. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go do this other thing. When you think back on that time, what was that 15-year-old girl like?
This is a really important part of the conversation because there's a lot that happened when I was 15 that is going to take us on many different tangents. So let's see where we go. But to first address what you just said, I didn't know art could heal. It is my purpose and mission to say that. And the reason I lead with arts and healing is if somebody had told me at 15 that you could create to express your emotions, you could create to show what's happening inside out and giving it permission to be seen, you can create to let your body regulate, all of these things. And back in the day, I'm in my my late 40s now, and I never had these types of conversations. If I had known art could heal, I would have kept doing it. But I only knew that about art as a vocation or as a prestigious thing. There's a lot of bourgeoisness about art that you're aware of. But the reason this is important is at 15 is when I started having an eating disorder. And I started with anorexia, then moved to bulimia, but I used both of those things to control and create that feeling of safety because I didn't know how to release what was happening inside of me. I didn't realize how much emotional pain I was in. And so I was physically purging. And that's how I view what I do every day, Alexa, is I'm purging my emotions on paper. And by giving it permission to be seen, that's the healing. I don't actually have to do anything else because I'm giving it permission to sit outside of my body. And when I see it, there's something healing about going, oh, that's what depression looks like, or that's what overwhelm looks like. That's so powerful when you actually
it's so powerful. It's so powerful. And also that you're not identifying that narrative as who you are.
Yes, that's huge. Being the identity of it rather than the process of being it. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, and there is also, I'm also curious because there's no question. And I having experienced, your book and have being, watching your works and doodling myself. Now, you also are incredibly talented, like very talented.
Thank you.
So when you were a child, when you were young, and you were sketching, were you ever sharing your sketches with anybody? Did you ever have any external validation where someone's like, wow, you're really good at this?
Yes, the answer is yes. So one of the reasons and this is really interesting, the timing of when we're talking. One of the reasons I never stepped into being an artist full time is I had this concern that when somebody bought my book, that they would look at my art and be very intimidated and add to the narrative that it had to look lit this way. But the answer is I actually was technically gifted. Like when I was a kid, I knew how to sketch what I saw, and that's a gift. However, I don't consider what I do, drawing and sketching, to create it for artistry's sake. I do it for emotional and mental healing. And when you take it from the realm of an execution, of a technical execution, which is what people initially admire, and you really listen to the story behind the reason why I do it, that's what I really lead with. And I call my work visionary because it's ethereal in the sense that I never know what I'm going to create, Alexa. I just know that I need to get whatever's happening inside of me out, and I trust the process and I surrender to the process. And surrender is definitely the one emotion that I definitely would say is probably one of the biggest emotion that I was able to find in healing, because surrendering requires you to trust the process, but also to imagine a future that you can't even dream of, because you're allowing the magic of it to unfold rather than envisioning, this is what I'm going to draw an apple. And now you've kind of forced yourself into a path of drawing an apple. And that's a metaphor. So I always talk about there's nothing happening on paper that's not happening in my life.
Oh, it's so cool. There's so many things about this, Sheila, that I absolutely love. And I think that, we can never ask ourselves, like, why did it take you till your 40s to really embrace this? Why, did you not tap into this as a young person? Because from my vantage point and my own experience, as someone who's just a few years older than you are, I can look back on my career path, for example, my life choices, and now sitting here in my midlife can say, well, all of those things helped me become the person that I am today. And the way in which you are showing up in your process, even the ability to surrender, there is a maturity in that.
Yes.
And there is, so perhaps, not perhaps, in my vantage point or my philosophy, it all happens in divine time.
It does.
And I'm sure that the things that you learned going through your first career path, or maybe there were multiple career paths, but your journey as a professional person prior to your awakening to this process and then owning that, which I want to talk about, is appreciating those lessons and tools and skills and growth and all of that led you to right now.
Yes. And it's interesting that you talk about that question, because I often wonder what would have happened if the book that I wrote existed when I was 15. And the reality is it was never meant to be. The other part of this that you and I really connect on a deeper level is the path in which I took was really a spiritual kind of the hero's journey path, right? I often describe where we are in the world today as a crisis of faith. And I'm not talking about the crisis of faith in the sense of just religious or spiritual. I'm talking about faith that the world is going to be okay, hope, all of these things. And, I'm sure that's one of the wishes people put in their wish beads, is that, having faith that this is everything that is happening is leading us to the greater good. And the reality is, when I look at my artistic journey, it very much mirrors my spiritual journey. I grew up Catholic, and I was a devout Catholic because I was raised that way. And around 15, around the teen years, my mom gave me the freedom to choose if I wanted to go to church every week. And of course I chose not to, only because I was given the freedom to actually reject the dogma of what I was not feeling. And I was going to church, but I was going through the motions. It wasn't even about the church at that point. I needed to assert my independence. And the further away I got, not only to the religious connotation of what I was trying to reject, I just started to lose my way in general, because you give someone a lot of freedom, but they're also going through a lot of trauma. It's too chaotic, too noisy, which is why I felt the business world was so safe, because in the business corporate world, the values and the framework in which you exist is already defined for you. Like you end up climbing the corporate ladder. You're told this is what success looks like. Grit, basically everything's laid out for you like a blueprint, and you just have to walk it. I mean, and for somebody like me that was so lost at the time, I was so happy to find this. And so I've been in the consulting space for a long time because it's so easy to walk a path when the path is already defined for you. And my path is no longer defined. It's completely meandering and I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's actually scarier for more people than the other path.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I also really appreciate your telling of that story in such an empowered way, like with so many insights about yourself. It's obviously goes without question. You've, and you had mentioned like whether it's, therapy or self-discovery that you have identified that for yourself. And it's such an empowering story, which is that's the power we have, is to tell our stories.
Exactly.
And even the way that you speak about your visionary and healing work, it's such an empowered way to talk about it. Not, I'm going to go make another cool sketch. Watch me make this cool sketch. It's such an interesting, powerful process to what does it mean to surrender in the process? What does it mean to allow emotions to be expressed? Because you can't consciously understand it.
No, like the moment it's in here, not in your heart, you already are. That's where art comes in. I think we are in our heads so much. It's so easy to get there.
Yes. No, you were talking about where we are with a crisis. Did you say a crisis of faith?
Yeah.
Right now, the way that I'm thinking of this time, and I just watched a documentary film last night that was about climate change and what's happening. I also think that we're in an opportunity of consciousness. We're a choice of consciousness. How can we take where we are, our own thoughts? Because I believe that the collective consciousness begins with each individual person.
Individuality.
But the idea that how can we take where we are with compassion and elevate ourselves? And what I love about the work you do is that it is such a unique channel for self-discovery. It's something that is so interesting and accessible. And so I want to talk about your work as a teacher, and specifically the book that you wrote, Sketch by Sketch, so that you bring people into a place where they can use sketching as another tool in their personal development toolbox. What was that like to decide, there is a methodology here to writing a book, to publishing a book and all of that?
Oh, I still laugh at this at the genesis of how the book came to be, because it came from such a childlike place. I remember, so just to recap what I decided after I finally addressed my debilitating anxiety, showed up in my flying and talking to that therapist, I decided to sketch daily, but I knew I couldn't do it in the job that I had before because I had major burnout. I was a managing director of an agency and I didn't see a path forward where I could find that. So I ended up quitting that job 6 months later, found another job and committed to daily sketching at a coffee shop. But the reason I'm bringing that up is at this coffee shop, it's public place. I'm sketching and I could see people really drawn into what I was doing. I'm sure I was exuding this joy because I had found this practice again. And I think it was like 6 weeks in, Alexa, I noticed my body was regulating. And I was like, this is interesting. I've never been this calm. I don't remember. I should have said, I don't remember the last time I felt this calm. And I noticed my breathing was regular. And I thought, do people know art could heal? I remember having that moment of, and I remember thinking, God, I wish people could see my face right now. It was like that moment of awe, but also like, duh, like, obviously. And I went, gosh, I need to do workshops to get people to do this. So and the good news is my background is facilitation. So the very first thing I did is I had the just confidence to take what I was doing and kind of breaking it down and doing workshops. So I did workshops and then COVID hit. And I had the opportunity to do Zooms all over the world. So what COVID allowed me to do is actually tap into the world. And I noticed that if you're sad in Africa and sad in Australia and sad in Asia, the feeling of it is very similar. How it's expressed can be different culturally, socioeconomically, but the feeling of it is very universal. And so what I ended up doing is taking my facilitation skills, breaking down what I was doing. And then I had an incredible writing partner who happened to teach the Artist Way at Laguna College of Arts. So she was able to create a scaffolding along with my editor. And then I just broke it down. But I have to tell you, it came from a very innocent place of, do people know art could heal? Because I've never heard people lead with it. Really, at the time, now everyone's leading with it because of mental health. But when I started 7.5 years ago, it just wasn't spoken about in that way.
I'm so excited about this because as we talk about where the world is right now, the rise of mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, people's bodies dysregulated, our thinking dysregulated, the intersection between humans and technology, which is moving very fast. Your background uniquely positions you to offer a way for people to get back in touch with themselves, to learn how to self-regulate. It's inside your own personal journey, the hero's journey, yourself as casting yourself as the heroine of your own tale, which is awesome. But I love this idea of going beyond the thinking brain and moving into a much more playful space of curiosity, so that people can just have, again, like Wishbeads is just another tool. But a way to play again. And I just think that's so incredibly powerful. It really is.
There's two words that keep coming up, and I'm so glad you're reflecting it, because it means the message on which I'm leading with is hitting. Is you say play and you say tool a lot. And that's exactly what I say. So when I think about SketchPoetic as a methodology, it is a tool. I never say that I am a healer in the sense that I'm going to heal you. What I can say is it healed me. Here's my story. And here's the tool in which it offered. And then the other part is play is a huge part of why it's healing. We often lose as we get older, we adult, as you know, we not only lose the act of play, but when we do play, it's so structured and it's got so many rules. Like, when you think about it, the last time you played, and I guarantee you there were rules, a lot of rules. And it's board games, is that type of play. Though when was the last time we actually got into the state of play? And then the other two components of SketchPoetic is flow, which is very common. People understand flow. It's getting lost in the process. But the third part is the deeper healing, which is introspection. It's finding meaning in the marks. And it's the meaning, it's actually finding the meaning that my book really focuses on, because what we talk about embodiment, I think the difference between my book and, let's say, The Artist's Way, which is one of the books that I definitely was inspired by, which is about morning pages and daily writing, the way that I feel it differentiates from The Artist's Way is I talk a lot about embodiment. I talk a lot about the physical presence and being in touch with that, because it was actually my body that was taking the hit with the trauma. It wasn't so much my mind. My mind was my protector in the sense that it would push things away. It would help me disconnect and disassociate. But I was so unaware of what was happening in my body. I just wasn't connected. And I'm now in the state of much more alignment with my mind, body, and spirit. And I can tell you right now, I'm in awe of that. Like, my body is a freaking intuitive guide just in and of itself. Like, I can tell when my body feels discomfort. It feels like somebody is not telling the whole truth. I can tell when my body is sensing some sort of danger. I can tell when my body is feeling ecstasy. And I didn't understand and feel it truly. I didn't know what it meant to be in my body until recently.
And from my knowledge of eating disorders, it is this desire for control. And so it sounds like to me the evolution of your journey went from this experience of I'm going to control my body and maybe control my feelings or whatever, to this idea of embracing and surrendering to the full embodied experience, using your methodology of sketching and being present into that process as a way to tune in and align yourself on a deep physical and energetic and spiritual level.
Well, it's interesting about the whole physical aspect of all of this. I remember hearing about a thesis. My girlfriend, it was a coworker at the time. I'm not going to tell the full story, but she was in Africa, an anthropologist. And she saw this doctor who shamed a little boy who was hurting. He had a lot of pain, and she was horrified that he shamed him in front of this tribe. And what she learned is, and I don't know the actual neuroscience behind it, but the idea was that our brains can only handle one type of pain at once. We cannot experience physical and emotional pain at once. So the reason I mention that is when I think about my eating disorder or any sort of moment when I'm disconnecting, it's because I'm using physical connection. So purging and anorexia is not only about control, it's controlling the body. It's about the physical body. It's about what you see. It's what it's how you relate to your body. And that's because I was so emotionally overwhelmed that I needed a physical expression to disconnect from the emotional overwhelm. And that's why people cut. It's also why people drink. What we don't realize is drinking, addiction, is actually a physical connection, because when we're drinking, we actually know what it feels like to be numb. And so there's this interesting dichotomy of healing. Like for me, and I think this is the biggest part of my own healing journey that has fascinated me, is I've always thought that I was connected to my body. And then the more connected I am, the more I realize I have such love for my body now, in the sense of, like it's constantly protecting me, but it's doing it on autopilot. So we take it for granted, really. Yeah. And then what happens? We get older, or we're confronted with somebody we love that's ill. And then we're reminded of how incredibly divine our vessel is. So yeah, I'm always in a constant state of awe now.
Yeah. It's so amazing. And I think that there is also a parallel between the planet. Yes. We can take for granted the beauty of wildflowers and the sun and the waves and all of this. And the idea is, if we hold ourselves, our body, as perhaps a parallel for the world, and we take care of it, we can then, our bodies, our minds, our spirits, that is the same energy of taking care of our environment, of taking care of our community, of taking care. And so I can't stress enough this invitation, or actually acknowledgement of the work that you're doing, but also hopefully those listening and watching to really see the opportunity here. And I want to go back to something you mentioned. You had mentioned acute anxiety, and I thought I heard you say flying.
Yes.
Was there something that came up very specific that was your, I would say, biggest wake-up call that said, like, something has to change?
Yes.
Because I think most people live in fear of those big things, the panic attack, or the something that's like, the world's falling. But sometimes the universe gives us these precise things so that we change.
Yeah, interestingly, yes, it's the fear of turbulence. So it's not just flying. Takeoff and landing, I was okay with. I didn't have that feeling of claustrophobia that some people have. Mine was specifically turbulence. But your question was really around for me, it was a buildup, but it was this moment when there was a point where 3 to 4 days before a flight, I was already anxious. So it got to a point where my anxiety kept on getting longer and longer, the period of the anxiety around one event, which is a turbulence that hasn't even hit yet. That was it. And then the second part is how I was managing it. And this is embarrassing, but also part of my story, is I would have to get drunk to get on the plane. So I didn't care what time of day it was. I'd have Bloody Marys in the morning, wine in or tequila. Wow. And I'd have to get buzzed to get on the plane. And then I would carry these little alcohol bottles. And the moment I thought turbulence was going to hit, I downed them. So I was pretty much drunk the entire end-to-end experience, to where I have terrible stories of vomiting in the plane and not being able to leave the plane because I was still so drunk. And that was my way of handling the turbulence. And we already know, and I love that you speak in metaphors. I knew subconsciously and unconsciously that my fear of turbulence had nothing to do with the fear of the plane. It was tapping into all the many times in my life that I've had turbulence. And that's the thing that I often talk about with especially the youth of today, because they're young and they're building all these memories and they have all these experiences. But I tell them to think of emotions in the flip way. So when you have a positive experience, you have all these emotions with it. Well, the flip happens. When you experience an emotion, all the memories attached to that emotion rushes to you unconsciously. So when I'm in turbulence, I feel out of control. I feel like I might die. I feel like I don't know if I'll see my loved ones, and all these things that I fear come through. But then I'm actually tapping into every single time that feeling has happened. And so that's what and also on the positive, joy. When we feel joy, we're feeling every moment we've ever felt joy. It's such an expansive thought, but it's also very overwhelming when you realize how much our emotions tap into the unconscious part of our minds.
Yeah. And I thank you so much for your honesty, Sheila. I just think it just goes, I just need to acknowledge that,
Thank
is that
you.
I think it's so powerful and such a powerful learning for all of us to hear the truth of your story. Many of us want to, just share the Instagrammable parts of ourselves and brush over the things that are like, that wasn't my, my most shining moment.
No, it definitely
But
was not.
but how beautiful for you to take it out of the shadows, and put it into the light, and to own the truth of that and the discovery of that and the transformation of that. So of course I would imagine it's empowering for you, but it's also like extremely generous and empowering for each of us. We all have had moments that we are embarrassed about, or
Mhm.
choices that we thought we wish we never made. And yet somehow they were important textures of our own life story, so that we could have something that pushes us to the place where we're then ready to transform, where we say
Well,
enough is enough.
exactly. You said this earlier, but I love what you said. I think it's very important to double down on what you said, that every experience we had leads us to where we are, but you use the word compassion. So the one thing about healing that I talk about is you and I have experienced many different emotions in the way we give to others, but you add the word self to every emotion and you'll realize how poor we are. So compassion, I'm very compassionate with other people. See a homeless person, I watch the news, I'm bawling. But the moment you put self-compassion in there, it's such a nuance that we don't do. And so what that experience of drinking and basically being inebriate, I can never say that word, but getting so drunk so that I could numb my body. I have great empathy and compassion for addiction, because I know what it feels like to use a substance to numb. So I have
Yeah.
great compassion. Same thing with eating disorders. I can have compassion for anyone that physically hurts themselves because I know. So every experience, and the reason I share my story is that one of it is to be able to let people know that there's no judgment in there. And again, self-judgment. There's a lot of self-judgment. And the other emotion that is very prevalent in our society is shame.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a content writer for Compassion Prison Project, and they talk about shame in the prison systems. That is the internal prison that we put ourselves in because society has put all these reasons why we should feel shame. But I think the important part of my story, and for people like you and I to talk so openly about it, is we have a lot more in common with people in the prison system that we want to ever see. And it is
Yeah.
the prison in our minds that
Oh,
ends up hurting us the most.
absolutely. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. And I think that this evolution of consciousness, this opportunity that we all have now to evolve, that on one hand, you can hear your story, reflect on your own story, and say, wow, my life isn't as dramatic as that. And yet the magic actually happens in these gentle shifts, because I don't know a single person that doesn't look and reflect on their day-to-day choices and think, I wonder if that's working for me.
Yes.
Or, just to shift a little bit. You may hear the concept of like, don't look at your phone first thing in the morning. It's not like a terrible thing to do. No one's going to get mad at you, or you don't have to shame yourself. But what would it feel like to keep your phone away from your bed and wake up and have an intentional moment, without a digital device? Just that. Or what would it feel like to take a walk around your neighborhood at sunset? How would that change your evening? Or read an empowering book before you go to bed? How would that change your thinking? Or watch, not so much news and just read it instead. It's all of these like delicate shifts. Or listen to a great song and hula hoop in the backyard for 5 minutes, which is what I did earlier today. It's like
I love
these,
that. You hula hoop. That's
I
super
do
cool.
hula hoop, because it's playful.
Yeah.
And I really am not someone who I've understood. Like, I do not enjoy going to a gym. I don't, and there are things that I know about myself, but if I can move my body in a playful way, that's fabulous for me. Changes my energy, changes how it just gets me going. So yes, I do hula hoop.
That's where the world's going, though. When I say I lead with arts and healing, I should really say the arts, because I'm passionate about music, dance, spoken word, all the events that I lead with arts and healing. I invite all of those creative tenants. I should do hula hooping now, but
we'll do it together. Don't worry.
Yeah, no, but it's exactly what you're saying, Alex. It's all about play. And the more we allow and active play, physical interaction play. But then the other thing you said that I feel is such an important part of the conversation too, is this idea of comparative comparison, whether it's comparative trauma or comparative experiences. I definitely hear it in the healing workshops that I do, is that when people hear other people's story, they immediately start to retreat from the conversation, because they hear a story and it sounds so horrific. And then they immediately compare and go, well, their pain is much bigger than my pain. And what I'm trying to lead with when I said I did the global Zooms is that it doesn't matter the size of the pain. When you're feeling it, it is the only thing that exists at that moment. It is very much a level playing field. And so this is the compassionate part of us that we often lack, is that we compare to give us a reason not to allow us to feel. It's all a game. It's a trick in our heads. Comparison, all it does is gives us an excuse to not feel, right? Oh, Alexis had much trauma than me, so therefore I don't really have permission to feel my pain. That's just an excuse, but we need to create these rational reasons. And that's all, to me, that's what imposter syndrome is about. That's what comparison is about. It is a external reason and validation to not feel. We avoid our feelings so much. It's so constant in our world today. Yeah. And we have a lot of reasons to avoid it. There's a lot happening in the world that's very overwhelming for many people.
Yeah. And I have a lot of compassion for that, and I think we're entering into this very delicate explorative time where I believe it's actually a privilege to be able to even have these conversations, and to be able to have the ability to have businesses that are about sketching and art and teaching and wishing and imagining and all of that. So even though we see the reality of what's going on around us, we're also holding the energy of possibility.
Yes,
and inviting experiences for community and for play and for self-discovery and for ease and joy and grace. And it's like there's a class that I teach, that I have online, and it's called Relentless Optimism. Because there's something about, it's a goal setting class, to have goals and then be organized about it and then take action towards them and ultimately achieve your goals. But the energy behind it is relentlessly optimistic. And the tension between the two, like, to be relentless means to be so committed that you're just unwavering in your commitment to move forward, coupled with this idea of optimism, which is this well of positivity that you can feed upon. And my feeling is that I feel so, in a way, like proud that no matter what life threw at me, I am still optimistic about our truth, and about possibility. And I think that through the arts, through play, through teaching, through experiences, through community, we have the possibility of discovering who we really are, what we're truly capable of creating in this world, and the change that we're going to create, not just for ourselves, but for others. It'll be an energy. And I have no doubt that you sitting at your coffee shop, doing your healing process, posting it on Instagram to your wonderful following, but there is magic, like the butterfly effect, that sketch is being felt as a collective healing in ways that we couldn't possibly understand. Well, I know that about your work.
No, thank you for saying that. I love the way you connect with my work. When I say art heals, I don't just say it in the sense of a purpose and mission. When I started sketching, I did observe that the marks were trying to tell me something about myself. But then it got to a point where the deeper I got into the process, the more I tapped into what I call the collective energy. You talk about the collective consciousness. We all have the ability, I don't care how in tuned you are, we have spider senses. Look, we're animals at the end of the day. And when we tap into that gut instinct, that is the collective consciousness. Like an animal knows when an animal is behind them, about to pounce. That's collective consciousness. It's just this energy, this field. And that's how I feel about my art, is that if you can stare at what I create, the invitation is to go inwards. It's not about, well, what is Sheila thinking and what is she trying to express? I tell you what I'm telling you what I feel, but that's not actually the invitation. The invitation is the marks are resonating. There's this energy to it, whether you hear music or you feel it or it evokes an emotion. There's a relationship. That's what art does. Art provokes and it evokes. But the question is, do you take that feeling and do you go deeper inward? And most people don't. Most people walk at a gallery, look at it, admire it, and then they're done. And they don't really take a moment to go inward. And I just want to say this compassionate statement. You asked me earlier why it took me so long to find this place, not only because it was a divine path and that was what how my life took. But if I were to describe the time period of 20 plus years where I wasn't using my art, the one word that came up was surviving. I was a survivor. I was just surviving. And even though, and this is what's interesting about that word, is when you look at the word surviving, you think of it as like this socioeconomic thing where you're trying to pay rent. There's definitely that aspect of survival. But if you looked at my life, Alexa, you would have thought I was thriving. I had a successful career, a great family. I got to do we had the privilege to do what I did, but you would not look at me and go, she's surviving. And I'm saying that because it's an important thing for us to talk about, is we look at the external vessel in which we're seeing people in the world, and we already identify with how well they're doing. And the reality is, mentally, I was unstable. Mentally, physically, I was not doing well. But in the eyes of society, I was very successful. And so I say that because sometimes we forget, we hear this idea of that people have stories and we never know what's happening in people's lives. But that's the truth, is when we look at someone, we're looking with our eyes rather than looking and feeling with our intuitive self. And that's ultimately what SketchPoetic is about, is the more you sketch daily, the more you tap into that state of play and flow. You look up from the piece of paper and you start to see people like artwork.
Yeah.
And I look at Alexa and I go, wow, that's so interesting. The marks that she's making, the way her smile, is slanting, or the way I feel when I'm in her presence. So I interact with people differently now.
Yeah.
Because I'm able to look at people as if they are a work of art.
Ooh, I love that. And you're talking about the ways in which we interpret, let's call it success.
Yes.
And their stories. And a friend of mine just returned from a 2-month, basically backpacking trip throughout Europe. And she shared recently about, as she's returned to the US, and she's a US citizen, she sees the stark contrast about the patterns that we have as US citizens versus European countries, the kind of values they have in terms of how they live their day-to-day lives. And that as the US, ironically, we work a lot. We are actually known for our industrious nature. And when I've spent time in Italy, my husband's Italian American, and it's amazing how it takes me a while to like shake loose the patterning of do, go, and yet she was saying how the way that different European countries are structured, there is much more sense of community, of biking versus driving, this connectedness that is valued in play and shared meals. And it's very different. So my hope is that as we really take a pause and reflect on many of the things that have informed American society, we're both Americans here, but American society, that we start to become more caring and more careful about the world that we're creating for our children, for the future, for our society, and less attention on these metrics like the Dow Jones and, the political arena and all of this. That paradigm needs to soften. and evolve. And I think that what we can do is that we can mimic that more. So, for me, I don't have such a hectic life that I can't, I say like, oh, I just want my friends over and have like a potluck meal or a movie in the backyard, and I said to my husband, like, if it's not on the calendar, something else will fill its space. So if we say we prioritize these things, we just have to simply do them. And we know that we're going to love it. Whether we book this 2-day camping trip or we do a potluck or we do like a homemade pizza night or whatever, start really stepping into that. And that's what starts to create the reality of it. So
I love that so much. Yeah. We could go on a whole nother tangent of how America or the Western culture is perceived by the rest of the world. I have a lot of theories about it. It's all related to what you and I talk about a lot, which is the evolution of our consciousness beyond our day to day. It's also very similar to what you said about the metaphor of nature. I definitely have a different relationship with nature. I told you about my beach walks.
Mm-hmm.
The deeper my healing has been, the more connected I am to nature. And I genuinely believe the global climate and politically, the way people perceive Americans pre-COVID and post-COVID, I think of America as an embodiment of an energy of a persona, right? Americans have a persona perception in the world. And that persona is very much mimicking a lot of the mental health crisis, right? And so I don't want to go on the tangent of this because it's a much deeper conversation. But I think of America and every country as a persona. What Americans are known for, large proportions, hardworking, the entrepreneurial spirit, this idea of commune. I love that you talk a lot about community. One of the things I love doing as an artist is co-creating, because the idea is when you co-create with someone, whether it's a workshop or a piece of art, that piece of art or that piece of energy would never have existed had these two people not come together. And just how incredible that is, right?
It is.
So, I do think there's a lot happening in the Western world that is needed. It's hard, it's painful. I think people perceive us as a very divided nation, but that division had to happen in order for us to wake up. I don't think we could have healed our country, and we are in the process of healing, unless we actually just tore down all the walls and acts that we were all in unity and everything was great and racism didn't exist. COVID broke that shit down.
And I mean, not unlike your own personal journey, that's where there's such parallels.
Yes.
Each of us have this moment where we have a reckoning, and then we get to make a choice. And it's so interesting because just thinking about this wishing journey, I have this wonderful, amazing woman that I work with, Laura Eastburn, who is her specialty is wordsmithing and in the ad world. And I really struggle with I know what I'm doing with Wishbeads. I need some new ideas to bring it out into the world. We were having a meeting yesterday, and I want to give it some energy, so I'm going to talk about it now. We got to this moment where we're talking about, the philosophy. She's a really interesting woman, really like her. And we had that moment where she's like, okay, but tell me a little bit about what's your really big wish? And I said, it's so interesting that you said that, because on September 23rd, 2023, I declared the intention to have 1 million people wishing at once. And I have no idea. I have literally no clue. It seems literally almost like farcical that I could make this thing come true. And she's like, that's what we're going to share. She said, you model what is possible for people. And we are going to just play and figure this out. And why not? And suddenly my whole body was like, and I was like, well, that sounds really fun. Because it's not attached to the result. It's the joy of saying permission, giving yourself permission to just do it. And then whatever happens, and the judgment of people think, and I've seen it, oh my God, I've seen it on people's faces where they're like, what are you even doing? Why are you wasting your time? What purpose is that?
It's so
And
interesting that somebody would, I guess I would, it's so foreign to me to respond to you in that way. Because when I hear what you're saying, I get all inspired. My entire body gets
yeah,
chills too.
yeah,
But we always talk about you're already on the path. There's
yeah.
nothing that that conversation when you met is Laura, right? When you saw
Laura, yeah.
Laura,
Laura Eastburn. Yeah, she's
yeah.
awesome.
So Laura she was intended, you were intended to meet with her, and all of these things, like you and I were supposed to connect when we
Yep.
did. All of it is intended. But yeah, because you have such a strong vision, but the vision without execution, and that's the thing, that the nuance of the tension we talk about with this whole
Right.
idea of dreaming and wishing and the magic. I call it magic because it is what it is. I used to be a person that had and I still believe in vision boards. I think it's important to have visions. But what I do now, and I said this to you recently, is what I didn't have in my vision board is how I felt when I got there. And so
Mm.
you might have this 1 million wish, but then at the end, during that event, you're completely burnt out. You can't be in the moment. That is not what you want, right? And I
No,
know you wouldn't, because that's just not
no.
who you are. But that's what happened to me.
Right.
Is I had this vision of being this executive at a corporate space, making a lot of money, got there, burnt out, not mindful, had to drink to get on a plane. I didn't even think about that part of it. So very important if you're a vision driven person, a goal
Yeah.
oriented person. I invite people to say, in addition to, this is what I would love to see in the world and how I want to create in the world, this is how I want to feel. And mine is
Yeah.
peace, inner ease, freedom, all of those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, your work, my work, it's about allowing yourself permission to have the experience and then the accountability to do it. So it's one thing if you had this one-time experience where you sketched and it was transformative and you felt that it was a healing activity, but then you have the discipline and the integrity to do it over and over and over and over again. And I think that that's part of the teaching, and what happens when you're in community with people that model that, then you're like, oh, okay, now I know how to do it. And I think that that's where wishing and wish work come together, is that I think there is power in visioning with emotion and sensory experiences and specificity and all of that. And then also just the way we show up in the world, which is, don't let that experience, the sketch or the vacation or the retreat, stay in a silo. It's about drinking that energy on a very daily basis so that it becomes part of your new paradigm, and you learn to connect and trust your body and your instincts and your energy. You learn to gain guidance from your intuitive instrument that is you, so that you can build on it, and suddenly that becomes the new version of you.
Yeah, it's the difference between doing and being.
Yeah.
Being in the world is very hard in comparison to doing in the world. I'm a doer. I was a doer for a long time. So I know what I think a lot of us are doers. And that's also very Western culture, is the doing. Being, which is what you described in Europe, is this constant, like enjoying the espresso, looking at the world. That's a being presence.
Definitely.
So being is such a powerful thing to do.
Yeah. So we have some fun intentions that we are setting even together. And who knows what else we are cooking up, which I know a few other things. But I am so delighted to share your wisdom, your insights, and your beautiful work with this community. And can you just share how people can find you, learn more about you, pick up the copy of your book, get on your mailing list, all of that good stuff? And we're going to have all of those links in the show notes as well.
I happened to have a copy of my book. It's called Sketch by Sketch, A Creative Path to Emotional Healing and Transformation. It is, the great news is, when I started my Instagram account, I did it as an accountability partner. I wanted to make sure that I had some sort of visual diary. And because I was digitally born and bred, Instagram felt right. I didn't expect it to blow up the way it did in the sense of connecting. So my Instagram account is SketchPoetic. And that's the easiest way to find me, is search SketchPoetic, but Sheila Darcey, I'm leading more with that as my artist's name. But yeah, sketchpoetic.com, SketchPoetic on Instagram, and Sheila Darcey pretty much everywhere else. But if you just search that, you'll find me. And you can reach out to me anytime.
And I would also like to add that she also does commissioned work. So once you see Sheila's work on SketchPoetic, you're going to be like, I want to book a little
Thank you so
time with
much for that
her.
plug. I
Yeah.
totally needed that plug. It's not an easy journey to go and do art full time, but it's
Right. But your work is just exceptional. And I think that your process is phenomenal. And I do believe that there is this channeled energy that's happening when you're saying yes as the instrument of that expression. And so I highly recommend everybody check out SketchPoetic and then reach out to Sheila if you're interested in a commissioned piece. And by all means, pick up a copy of her book. And we'll be sharing more as we do more collaborations with Sheila, and probably have to do a part 2.
Yeah, we will. We will.
But thank you, Sheila. It's been just awesome to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. Such a joy.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, please do us a favor and leave a review and share the podcast with those that you love and who you think this episode might spark their heart. And of course, follow her work at SketchPoetic on Instagram, and you'll be notified, or you'll check out all the things that she has going on. We also are providing links to her book, Sketch by Sketch, and I highly recommend it. Have a beautiful day. Stay creative, have fun, be kind, be the change that you want to see in the world, as I know you've heard before, because you deserve to have your wishes come true. And your special light and your energy is precisely what this world needs right now. Stay amazing, and I'll see you next time.